Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. This Saturday is UFC 271, and in the main event, you have Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker 2 for the middleweight title. And this video is going to be my full breakdown and prediction for this fight. I absolutely love this main event. I am so excited for this fight, and I can't wait to break it down for you guys. If you guys enjoy these prediction videos, I'll be doing a couple more for UFC 271. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, and also please like the video. I really appreciate it. So if you look at the tail of the tape for this fight, Israel Adesanya is 32 years old. Robert Whittaker is 31. Israel Adesanya is 6'4". Robert Whittaker is 6 foot. Adesanya has an 80-inch reach, and Whittaker has a 73.5-inch reach. So a 6.5-inch reach advantage for Israel Adesanya, which is a crazy reach advantage. So if you look at Robert Whittaker first, the only fight that he's lost in the last 8 years is against Israel Adesanya. This fight took place back in October of 2019. We'll talk about that fight in a little bit. But in his run-up to the title, he defeated Derek Brunson. Derek Brunson's kind of like the middleweight championship keeper, I like to call him, instead of a gatekeeper. You beat Derek Brunson, you usually end up going to fight for a title. He beat Jacare Souza, which, this was Jacare in his prime. TKO'd him as well. And then he won the interim title against Yoel Romero. And, I mean, this fight was an amazing fight. He won via unanimous decision. And this was when that whole Bisbang GSP thing was going on. Maybe Dan Henderson mixed in there somewhere. And so they did an interim middleweight title, and they did Robert Whittaker versus Yoel Romero. Whittaker beat Yoel Romero. It was a close fight. And Yoel Romero, for those of you guys who didn't watch a lot of Yoel Romero, he was one of the scariest middleweights for a long time. And for Whittaker to go out there and beat him the way he did, not that it was a super dominant win, but just to beat him, and, a lot of people thought that first fight in particular was a very clear decision for Robert Whittaker. Super impressive at the time. And fun fact, a lot of people don't realize this, and I know someone who's watching this video is going to go fact check it. Robert Whittaker never defended his middleweight title. After he won that interim title bout against Yoel Romero, he was then promoted to undisputed middleweight champion after GSP beat Bisbang and then retired. There was no middleweight champion, so then they just elevated Robert Whittaker to the undisputed champ, but he technically never defended the belt because he fought Yoel Romero again a year after winning the interim middleweight title at UFC 225, and Yoel Romero technically missed weight, so it was a non-title bout. He beat him. It was a split decision. I actually scored this fight for Yoel Romero. Haven't seen this fight in a long while, but I just thought Yoel Romero did it. But it was a close fight. It wasn't a robbery by any means, but another solid win over Yoel Romero. And then after this fight is when he fights Israel Adesanya, and we're going to talk about that fight in a little bit, so I'm kind of going to skip over that. He loses. He gets KO'd in the second round. Then, after losing to Israel Adesanya, he goes on a 3-fight win streak, all by decision. He beats Darren Till, he beats Jared Cannonier, he beats Kelvin Gastelum. And all these fights, Robert Whittaker looked very, very impressive. In the Darren Till fight, he outclassed him, just put more volume on him, beat him by decision. The Jared Cannonier fight was a really solid performance. Jared Cannonier was kind of a scary guy. This was a #1 contender fight at the time. It was thought the winner of this fight was getting the next shot. And Jared Cannonier was blasting heavy leg kicks and even rocked Robert Whittaker in the third round of this fight. Impressive performance over a guy like Jared Cannonier. Was just able to outpoint him. And then his most recent win was against Kelvin Gastelum, April of 2021. And in this fight, again, just outclassed Kelvin Gastelum, more volume on him. And Kelvin Gastelum was there to fight. Kelvin Gastelum is not a guy who starts to lose, then all of a sudden, he just kind of packs it in. I talk about it all the time. Kelvin Gastelum was there to win up until the final round. Robert Whittaker was just the better fighter. He was landing combinations. He was taking Kelvin Gastelum down, holding him down for, substantial periods of time, and just winning the fight and just outclassed Kelvin Gastelum, which was a quality win, even though I know a lot of people like to crap on Kelvin Gastelum. So if you look over at Israel Adesanya, he made his way to the belt. He beat Brad Tavares. He made his UFC debut against Marvin Vettori. He won by decision. Then he beat Derek Brunson, TKO'd him. Then he fought Anderson Silva on a card that the original main event for that card was supposed to be Robert Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum. Whittaker had to pull out, so that fight was canceled. And then what happened after he beat Anderson Silva is Kelvin Gastelum versus Adesanya was scheduled for later that year because Whittaker was going to be out for a substantial period of time, and it was for the interim middleweight title. Adesanya fought Kelvin Gastelum, one of the best fights I've ever seen, probably the best middleweight fight of all time. I don't know if that's recency biased, or maybe I'm just thinking about it right now, but it was a crazy war. I had a 2-2 going into the 5th round, and Adesanya drops him and almost finishes him in the 5th round. Amazing fight. If you have not seen Israel Adesanya versus Kelvin Gastelum, go back and watch that fight. So then Israel Adesanya wins that fight. He's the interim middleweight champion. He takes on Robert Whittaker at UFC 243. KOs him in the 2nd round. We're going to talk more about that fight in a minute, so we'll move on. Then he fights Joel Romero, has a very boring performance against Joel Romero. Then he defeats Paulo Costa, absolutely outclasses Paulo Costa. And a lot of people going into this fight, myself included, I actually picked Paulo Costa to win this fight. But, Paulo Costa went in there and just got absolutely outclassed, got embarrassed by Israel Adesanya, did not touch him. Adesanya showed his footwork, he showed his power, he clips Paulo Costa, drops him, then finishes him with ground and pound. Amazing performance. And, the way he used his footwork to avoid the forward pressure of Paulo Costa, the way he chopped the legs, just an amazing performance. And, if not the title win over Robert Whittaker, the Paulo Costa is probably his best performance. Then he goes on to move up to the light heavyweight division and fight Jan Blachowicz at UFC 259, March of last year. And in this fight, I know Jan Blachowicz won this fight. He won it by decision. But Israel Adesanya did not look terrible in this fight. Jan Blachowicz was just able to use his strengths to beat Israel Adesanya. There's a whole different strategy to the fight when the guy that you're fighting has nuclear power and also he's much bigger than you. So Adesanya really had to play this fight safe. He gets outstruck in the majority of the rounds. I don't remember exactly what I scored it. And then in the 4th and 5th round, Jan Blachowicz is able to get Israel Adesanya down, and Adesanya is not able to get up. But overall, I think there was a lot of pros for Adesanya that you could take from this performance. I think early in the fight, Jan Blachowicz got a takedown, and Israel Adesanya found his way back to his feet. Even though I know a lot of people talk about, Jan Blachowicz was just able to control him on the ground, Israel Adesanya was looking for a way to get up. It's not like he just super accepted the position like some guys do. I know Jan Blachowicz was just huge. It was late in the fight, and he was able to hold him and win the fight, but I still don't think it was the worst performance. And also, to go to decision against Jan Blachowicz, I don't think is the worst look. And his most recent title defense was at UFC 263 in June of last year and against Marvin Vettori. And this fight wasn't super exciting. It wasn't as good as it probably could have been. But Adesanya putting on another masterclass performance, kind of just picking Marvin Vettori apart from the outside, kicking the legs, defending the takedowns. Marvin Vettori got a couple takedowns in this fight, but Adesanya scrambles right back to his feet. And I think that's good against a guy who's very well-rounded in Marvin Vettori. Marvin Vettori has good stamina, good wrestling, decent power, decent ground and pound. And the fact that, Adesanya was able to be taken down, and Vettori went for a lot of takedowns in this fight, and Adesanya shook off a lot of them, defended a lot of them. Even though he was taken down a couple times, he worked his way back to his feet. And it's not like the Jan Blachowicz fight where, he was kind of controlled for long periods of time. In the 2nd round of this fight, I think Vettori got his back, but that was the most trouble Adesanya was in the whole fight. He chopped the legs of Marvin Vettori, kind of picked him apart from the outside. Wasn't a lot of volume, but it was enough to win every single round in my book. I thought he won all 5 rounds. So now if you look back, I've been talking about their resumes, and they both have pretty good resumes. If you go back to that original fight back at UFC 243 in 2019, what happened in that fight? And, that's not that long ago. That's only, it's not even 3 years yet since that original fight between these two guys. But what happened in that fight? What happened in that fight was there was a very close first round. Robert Whittaker was lunging in a little bit sloppy, leaving himself susceptible to counters. And, I thought it was pretty even up until the last 10 seconds. Israel Adesanya clips Robert Whittaker, puts him down, and right as the bell goes off, and I believe Robert Whittaker was saved by the bell. If Adesanya would have had another 5 to 10 seconds, I think he would have finished Robert Whittaker off with ground and pound. It was nasty. Dropped him. Whittaker was flash KO'd for sure. He popped right back up, but his hands were not in a really good defensive position when he fell. And I think Adesanya would have just started letting ground and pound go and probably just KO'd him again while he laid on his back. Now it goes into the next round. Robert Whittaker looked very recovered, but more of the same strategy from the first round. Robert Whittaker rushing forward, lunging forward, throwing, kind of wild shots and looking to clip Adesanya, and Adesanya incorporating good head movement. and eventually Robert Whittaker rushes in, just like he had been the whole fight, just lunging in, looking for this big shots, and Adesanya counters him, drops him. He was hurt badly. Then Adesanya follows up with ground and pound, and the referee steps in, TKO in the second round. Now, going into this first fight, I predicted Robert Whittaker to win this fight. And my philosophy behind it was Kelvin Gastelum did so well in the Adesanya fight and landed good punches and hurt Israel Adesanya badly. And my thought process was, if Robert Whittaker can go in there and land the same amount of shots as Kelvin Gastelum can, I think that Robert Whittaker will put Adesanya to sleep or TKO him. That obviously wasn't true. And I think Robert Whittaker thought the same thing. He saw what Kelvin Gastelum was able to achieve, and, he went for the same strategy. He's like, I'm going to rush in. But Gastelum, a little bit trickier, a little bit faster, shorter than Robert Whittaker, I believe. And, it just worked for him. Kelvin Gastelum has very tricky boxing, and he was able to find Israel Adesanya's chin. But also, I'm sure Adesanya probably looked at that fight and made some adjustments and improved before he took on Robert Whittaker. So Israel Adesanya, massive win. But has Robert Whittaker gotten good enough? Has he made enough improvements since that 2019 fight to beat Israel Adesanya now in the rematch? He's taken on 3 quality opponents. You have the Darren Till win, you have the Jared Cannonier win, you have the Kelvin Gastelum win. And, even though all these 3 guys are top 10 ranked guys, and Robert Whittaker really won these decisively, I just don't think all 3 of those guys are close to the level that Israel Adesanya is, if that makes sense. I don't think you can look at those fights and say, okay, if Robert Whittaker can beat these guys, he can beat Israel Adesanya. I know that, I anticipated Robert Whittaker to beat all 3 of those guys. And it's a matter of, within these training camps, within these fights, has he made enough improvements to now defeat Israel Adesanya? And I think the answer is no. My official prediction for this fight is I have Israel Adesanya by 4th round TKO. And I just think Israel Adesanya is just too well-rounded and too good for Robert Whittaker. I think this fight is going to be much more competitive than the first fight. I think Robert Whittaker is going to come in with a different game plan for this fight, but I just don't think it's going to work out for Robert Whittaker. Israel Adesanya has great takedown defense, especially up against the cage. Israel Adesanya has great head movement. So I just don't know how Robert Whittaker is going to go in there and look for a KO shot. Israel Adesanya has great fight IQ. He's going to come into this fight and he's going to batter that lead leg of Robert Whittaker, just like Cannonier did, just like Israel Adesanya did in the first fight against Robert Whittaker. And I just don't see, even if Robert Whittaker, because Robert Whittaker has talked about, Jan Blachowicz set the game plan to beat Israel Adesanya. Well, that's fine and well, but again, I mentioned it earlier, it's a whole different ballgame of a fight when you're fighting a guy who has nuclear power and is also much bigger than you. Jan Blachowicz probably came into fight night against Israel Adesanya probably about 230 pounds, where Adesanya probably came in about 205, about what he weighed in at, if I had to guess, maybe 210. So Jan Blachowicz was the much bigger fighter, and that helps you in the grappling exchanges. And then on top of that, Jan Blachowicz has nasty KO power that Israel Adesanya had to be worried about, that helps sets up some of these takedowns. Robert Whittaker doesn't have that. I mean, he can definitely finish guys, but he doesn't have that nuclear KO power that Adesanya is going to be so worried about that it's going to leave him susceptible to takedowns. Adesanya fights with his hands low. I think he's able to defend the takedowns of Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker also is a former welterweight. He's lost to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in the past. That was so long ago. Not that I'm saying that matters, but the point I'm saying is Robert Whittaker, you look at him against Israel Adesanya, Robert Whittaker looks much smaller than Israel Adesanya. Adesanya has that height and reach advantage. I think he'll be able to stuff the takedowns. If I had to guess a path to victory for Robert Whittaker, no rushing in on Israel Adesanya. Do not do it. That's exactly what he wants. If Robert Whittaker is going to win this fight, I know this is going to sound terrible, and the fans are not going to like this. He's going to have to kind of fight like Yoel Romero. He's going to have to make Israel Adesanya come to him, but I don't even think that's going to win. Israel Adesanya's shown that he can kind of pick guys apart from the outside. And, Adesanya is the perfect mix of a KO artist, but also a point fighter. He doesn't have stamina issues. He can pick you apart from the outside, and he can win decisions. But he also, if you press it and he's on his game countering you, he can KO you easily. And, I think Robert Whittaker is going to have to try to win the game of points. If Robert Whittaker wants to win this fight, I think he has to win by decision. And I don't think he's going to be able to go in there. I know a lot of people like to sit on the fence and they don't want to say anything, especially when you're doing a video. It's recorded. Do anything where they look stupid afterwards. But I like to give you guys the honest truth, my honest opinion. I would be shocked if Robert Whittaker is able to take Israel Adesanya down and hold him down. He may get a takedown, but Israel Adesanya showed, even against Marvin Vettori, who I think is much bigger than Robert Whittaker, probably stronger than Robert Whittaker, he was able to work his way back to his feet multiple times with ease against the fence. Now, if I had to, give Robert Whittaker a strategy or guess, or you told me that he's having success, how does he have success? He has to look for takedowns in the center of the cage. He has to duck under a combination of Israel Adesanya and time a perfectly timed takedown. He did some of this against Kelvin Gastelum, where he kind of ducked under some punches, grabbed the body lock, and tripped him to the ground, kind of away from the fence. Because if Adesanya gets taken down, he's anywhere near the fence, he's able to work his way back to his feet. And the Jan Blachowicz fight, that was one of the takedowns that Jan got early in the fight, was against the cage. He was able to work his way back to his feet. And then later in the fight, the other two takedowns where he was able to cement the position for long periods of time, they were in the center of the cage. But I just don't think Israel Adesanya is not going to accept the position. I don't believe Whittaker can take him down and hold him down. Maybe he can incorporate the clinch, push Adesanya against the cage, kind of wear on those arms. Whittaker's a very good fighter, and I think he's the second best middleweight fighter in the division. I think that he is the champion if Israel Adesanya is not there. Just to compliment Whittaker a little bit, he has good wrestling, especially defensive wrestling. He has good combinations. He has a good variety of attacks. Whittaker loves mixing in. He pumps the jab, and then he leans over and throws that head kick, that brutal head kick. Sometimes he'll pump the jab, he'll throw the 1-2, and then lean over with that head kick. But Adesanya has a very high fight IQ. He has a great coaching staff. I'm sure they are well aware of that. Whittaker uses it multiple times in every fight. He rocked Jared Cannonier in the fight with that. Adesanya will know that's coming. For sure, 100%, he will be on the lookout for that combination. And so when you think about it from the point of Adesanya, I don't think he's going to be able to be taken down and held down. That means Whittaker's going to have to win the fight standing. And, the strategy has to be, can he pose enough of a threat with the grappling and takedowns to open up the striking? And I don't think it's going to be that. I think Adesanya will have plenty of confidence defending the takedowns. If he does get taken down, Robert Whittaker will not be able to cement a position on the ground. And Adesanya will be super confident. His hands will be low. They'll be coming from all different angles. He'll be brutalizing the lead leg of Robert Whittaker. And I think eventually, as the fight wears on, as Robert Whittaker opens up a little bit more, he gets a little bit more frustrated. He gets a little bit, demobilized with the heavy leg kicks on the lead leg, slows down a bit. I think eventually he's going to make a mistake, and Adesanya is going to clip him and TKO him in the 4th round. Overall, I think this is going to be a much more competitive fight than the first fight, but I just think Adesanya is just too good and too well-rounded, and I just don't see Whittaker going in there and outstriking him. I just don't see that happening. Adesanya has great head movement, amazing head movement. He showed it in the Vettori fight. He showed it in the Jan Blachowicz fight. He's not a guy that's easily hit, and if he's not easily hit, how are you going to win a fight if you can't grapple him and you can't hit him? It's just as simple as that. So let me know what you guys think in the comments section. Don't forget to like the video. I really appreciate it. It helps promote the channel, and thank you so much for watching.